So, a couple years back, my buddies and I tried to stay in the park after closing time. Our plan was to just take pictures. Nothing sinister or anything like that. We just wanted to be able to say we did it, you know? Basically, we snuck from bathroom to bathroom, corner to corner, and managed to stay there until they closed the gates and the maintenance team got to work. We were really surprised we hadn't gotten caught. It was almost strange, considering how much talking up Disney security gets. Our hearts were beating like crazy and we sat there for a while, hiding behind a tombstone by the haunted mansion. We noticed that it's true. The Disney staff had signed their names on every single one. So, finally, we got the courage to roam about, still being careful as to not be seen. It was really eerie. The occasional guard or maintenance worker would walk by, and we would just duck or hide behind a corner. It worked for about a half hour. Of course, we couldn't keep this up for long, and yeah, they caught us. I mean, give us props for even attempting and succeeding. But that's not where the story ends. So the first thing we said when they caught us was, "Are you going to take us down to the dungeon?" And we laughed. The security guard chuckled, too, so the mood wasn't too dreary. He told us we weren't the first people to try to sneak in after hours, but he wanted to know how we did it. We explained the situation, and he actually laughed and said that wasn't a bad plan. He told us he had to take us to the Disney jail to be further interrogated, which we thought was odd, but we figured from the beginning that if we had gotten caught, they'd take us down there. It might have been our plan all along. Maybe we wanted to see the Disney Catacombs more than we wanted to be in the park after hours. So he called for more workers to come and help him escort us, and we went on our way towards Toontown. Then they took us down in this elevator, right into hell. The first thing we noticed was how expensive looking the elevator was. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's hard to explain. It was like a stainless steel interior, with mirrors all around, and the floor was this tacky red carpeting, but it looked expensive. There were only 2 buttons in this elevator, not counting the emergency buttons. One said up, the other said down. I had forgotten to mention they never handcuffed us or zip-tied our hands. They just kind of walked beside us, expecting we'd follow. Not that we would have tried to make a run for it. I mean, these people seemed decent. Like, how were we supposed to know what was going to happen? The elevator stopped and we started walking down this perfectly shining, bleach-smelling corridor. There were no doors on either side. It was just a clean, empty corridor. We walked for what seemed like an eternity, and no one was talking any longer. It was me, my friends, the security guard, and 2 other maintenance workers. Finally, we reached a heavy metal door that had a security code and card reader. One worker put his card in, the other typed a code on the keypad. I watched the code he typed in. 121,566. I only remember it because I found out later what its significance was, and it makes me laugh. Looking back. Strange. It's strange that I could laugh. Looking back. They led me and my friends into another corridor. This one had doors down the hallway walls. Each door had a little plexiglass square, a 10x10-inch window at the top right corner. Looked sort of like a psyche ward, to be honest. Not so much like a jail. He led us to room 1901, and inside was a single desk with, surprisingly, 3 chairs for me and each of my friends. Then they left us there alone, closing the door on the way out. We sat in the chairs like obedient little children and waited for them to return, but they never did. 2 hours went by, and no one came back for us. My buddy Tim went to the door, and surprisingly, it was unlocked. He didn't open it, though. He was worried there'd be a guard on the outside and that they'd think we were escaping, and we weren't looking for any more trouble. So about 25 minutes went by, when we got restless and finally decided to leave the room. The hallway was empty like before. No signs of people. Nothing. We started calling out, "Hello? Is anybody here?" No one answered our calls. We noticed surveillance cameras were placed above every door, and we got to wondering if there was any living soul in this place at all. We should have left right then and there, but then again, whoever does the right thing in these kinds of situations? Every door looked the same, and each one had a specific number above it. They weren't in order like, say, rooms 110. They were scattered numbers. For example, our room had been 1901. But the door next to it was 1205. We got to thinking and finally assumed they were just randomly chosen. We walked up that hallway and had no idea where we were going, what we were hoping to find, or even if it mattered. My other buddy, Guy, decided we should just leave. He said that if they really wanted us here, they'd have come back, and maybe it was just a scare tactic. Maybe they just wanted to trick us into thinking we were being arrested and were waiting for us outside to laugh. I felt weary of the whole situation. And Tim was just quiet the whole time, nodding his head here and there. He was more interested in looking into the door's little 10x10-inch windows. That wasn't a good idea. I tried to tell him, but of course, no one listens to reason when they're freaked out. And we were definitely freaked the heck out at this point. The cameras above the doors were capable of motion detection and followed us as we wandered down the desolate corridor. A little red light at the bottom of the lens, blinking each second. No noise filled the air. All we heard was each other breathing. Then it happened. We had reached the end of the hallway. Unfortunately, the door at the end had another pin code reader. I tried the pin from before, the one I saw them type in, but it was invalid. At that moment, the lights in the hallway shut off and we heard the doors. Holy crap. I can still hear them to this day. The freaking doors opened, all lining up along the corridor. They made a subtle creak and then a boom as they hit the wall beside them with force. As I said, after I entered the invalid code into the keypad, the lights shut off and the doors opened, except for the door with the keypad. We also noticed as the doors opened, each doorway had a little bit of light seeping from its open pathway. We stood there, stunned, for a good 5 minutes, not knowing what to do. We figured we tripped some alarm and that this was just a protocol, a standard drill. In case of an attempted escape, what were we supposed to think? So we turned the other direction, away from the locked door. A sense of panic hit all three of us for some reason, and we got the urge to run. No one agreed to running. It was like we all knew we had to at the same time. Some sort of instinct, like a baby gazelle knowing when to run from a lion. We were in a lion's den alright. It wasn't until about the 10th door we passed that we began to look into the doorways as we passed them. Standing at the doorways were people in costume. We were running past Donalds, Mickeys, Goofies, Plutos, and all different kinds of Disney characters. It was insane, and we screamed at the top of our lungs. I know they say never look behind you as you run, but I did. They were leaving their rooms and following us, not running, just casually walking towards us. I think that is what made it that much more terrifying. Almost like they knew we had nowhere to go. Now, I don't know if it was all in my head, just from sheer panic and fear of the moment, but I swear, I could swear on my mother's life, I heard It's a Small World playing over an intercom. I have a fear of dolls, and the ride always gave me the creeps my whole life. Now I could see them, the little robotic dolls, standing in the doorways as we passed. Still following were the costumed characters. The dolls weren't chasing us. Thank God. I would have died from a heart attack if I had seen the dolls following suit, but they didn't. It didn't make the situation all that better. I mean, how many times have you been followed by a group of costumed individuals, seemingly out to freaking eat you alive? At least that's what I told myself to keep myself moving. Stopping meant being devoured by Donald Duck. I don't know about you, but I don't want to go out like that. Tim was crying. Guy was sweating and breathing heavily, and I just kept turning my head to see if we were being followed, and of course, we were. I'm not sure how many doors we had passed at this point, or if there really were different characters at each door, but I knew that this hallway had to end at some point and we were getting the fuck out of this place pronto. Easier said than done. I looked back after another minute or two of running, and noticed there was nothing behind us anymore that we could see. I heard footsteps, but figured we had gotten so far ahead and they were just still walking casually like before. The hallway was still going on for what seemed like forever, and Guy needed to stop, or he was going to faint from exhaustion. The door beside us was open, with the light on but nothing inside. I decided we would hide in there till we caught our breath and could continue onward. As we closed the door behind us, I noticed the room was 1966. Again, that meant nothing at the time. Tim was pacing the room. Guy was laying on the floor, still breathing pretty hard, and I was at the window, looking out. I saw nothing. No more music, no nothing. It was dark out and hard to tell for sure, but I figured I would have seen figures, shadows or something. Still, I kept watch. After 15 minutes or so, Guy said he was good to go. Tim was the only one smart enough to pull out his new Razr cell phone. No signal, of course. He opened the door subtly, quietly, but heard no footsteps. Nothing was following us anymore, but we weren't taking chances. We got back to running. It only took us another 7 minutes to reach the door, give or take. It had no keypad, and it was open. We entered the corridor from before, and thank God, there were no doors. We ran for the elevator and got in, pushed the up button and stood there, looking at each other, dumbfounded as to what had just happened. None of us spoke. We just waited till the elevator opened, back into Toontown, and started making our way for the front gate. We kept a low profile, using the same duck and hide technique that had gotten us this far from the get-go. Maintenance workers and security guards were still about, but we couldn't take any more chances. Finally, Tim lost it and took off in a sprint. I couldn't imagine what had set him off, until I looked and saw that everyone in the park just stood there, staring at us with blank faces. We heard a voice over the intercom explaining that 3 fugitives had escaped from captivity and needed to be escorted back into the jails below. We booked it. Catching up to Tim, costumed characters appeared from the shadows, workers and guards chasing after us. Everyone was sprinting for us. I couldn't see well, but I imagined drool dripping from their jowls. They wanted us back down there. We had escaped, and they were pissed. The gate was just up ahead. The creepiest thing about it all was that besides the voice over the intercom, the park was dead silent. No chat from the workers could be heard, even now, as we were running for what we assumed was our lives. From the characters, the workers, the guards, no one bothered to shout after us. No one yelled. No one said, "Stop," nothing. Just footsteps and the occasional cough from Guy. As we made it past the park's front gate, we didn't stop until we got to the parking lot. Our car was gone, and we were left scratching our heads. We continued running down the road, which went on for miles, stopping occasionally for us to catch our breath. We made it to a little corner store, where Tim used his cell to call a taxi cab. When it finally arrived, we took the cab back to the hotel we were staying at, paid the fare, and went up to our rooms. In the end, the next day, we got a call from the hotel's front desk, so we headed downstairs. There were officers waiting for us. They said our car had been impounded and we needed to pay the fine. They didn't ask us any other questions, and we didn't bother telling the police anything that happened. Even now, on this random board, people who don't have a reason to disbelieve me, don't believe me. So how could an officer of the law be expected to? We didn't bother. We simply paid the fine and drove home. We didn't talk about what happened the whole drive back. It wasn't until a couple weeks later that I got myself to search up the numbers. Curiosity, I guess. As you all know, Walt Disney was born the 5th of December, 1901. The room we were in was 1901, and the door next to it was 1205. Also, he died the 15th of December, 1966, which was the key code the worker had put in to let us into the main corridor. What a strange coincidence. I decided. Whether any of that was real at all, I couldn't tell you. Maybe our imaginations ran wild. We were tired. It was around 1 AM when we made our escape. So, it's plausible that's the answer. I'll never forget it, though, and I haven't been back since. Does anyone remember the SpongeBob episode The Sponge Who Could Fly? That aired in March 2003. It was dubbed the Lost episode by its commercials based on the episode's storyline, where Patchy the pirate uses a treasure map to find the SpongeBob episode that he lost. The night before the episode was aired, I was sick with the norovirus. I was vomiting almost every 5 minutes and I was feeling too ill to fall asleep, so I stayed up and watched TV. Around 2:30 AM, my stomach started to settle, so I planned to turn off the TV and try to fall asleep, but as I was reaching for my remote control, the opening for the SpongeBob TV show started playing. SpongeBob was my favorite show at that time, so I couldn't miss out on watching it. Although I thought it was kind of strange that they were showing SpongeBob in the middle of the night, I didn't think much of it. When the opening played, I noticed that the contrast of the animation was slightly darker than usual, and the theme song sounded a bit harsh and raspy. This made me feel a little uncomfortable, but I also tried brushing that off. The title card read, Lost Episode, so I figured that there was a mishap and Nickelodeon was accidentally airing The Sponge Who Could Fly. When the episode started playing, it immediately looked out of the ordinary. It started off with SpongeBob sitting on his bed. He had no mouth. Also he was slouched and was looking downward with a somber look on his face. Also he was pink. This was definitely not like himself. SpongeBob is so optimistic all the time. Why would he be acting like this? After about 10 seconds of seeing SpongeBob like this, he let out a big sigh, then looked over to his bedside barrel, and the screen zoomed in on a pill bottle that was sitting beside his clock. Once the screen zoomed in close enough to read the text on the bottle, it showed that it was a Prozac bottle. The show then panned to a scene with a much brighter contrast, showing SpongeBob taking one of the pills, then running off smiling and laughing. The fact that SpongeBob had to take pills to be well, himself, made me feel uneasy, especially because mental disorders and antidepressants are more mature themes that obviously shouldn't find a place in any kid's cartoon. It should be noted that this was seen on a show intended for kids. The screen then flipped back to the original scene of SpongeBob looking distressed, while at the same time changing the contrasts back to the darker one. The screen froze on SpongeBob for a few seconds, then flickered to a new scene. This scene showed SpongeBob at his desk, the same one that he was in the episode Procrastination, with his Prozac bottle, a piece of paper, and a pencil. In this scene, instead of staying at one contrast, the colors kept on flickering from light to dark. SpongeBob gripped the pencil in his hand, and a tear rolled down his face. The part that bothered me the most was that the tear didn't look like the usual blue, cartoon-style tears the characters in SpongeBob usually cry out. This tear was cartoon-style, sure, but it was greenish red, as if he was crying out acid or maybe some drug or something. SpongeBob wiped the tear from his face with his sleeve and began to write on the paper, reading out loud what he was writing. "I can't take it anymore," he said. As soon as he got that sentence out, a faint noise started playing in the background. It sounded like a child crying. This noise continued playing as SpongeBob continued writing. "My life has been horrible and hasn't gotten better. My best friend, Patrick, is only my best friend because he doesn't know any better. My neighbor, Squidward, hates my guts. He would probably be happy if I wasn't around anymore." SpongeBob stopped writing and talking and started weeping loudly. The color flicking started getting faster, and the cries in the background started getting louder, and it sounded like more children were beginning to cry. It could have just been my imagination, but I remember hearing one of the children very faintly yell, "He's gonna do it." The children's cries get louder and the colors keep flickering faster as SpongeBob keeps writing. "The only job I can get is being the fry cook at the Krusty Krab. My boss, Mr. Krabs, refuses to give me an actual paycheck, and he basically uses me to get more customers. I'm in my 20s and I still don't have my driver's license. Sandy is the only girl I've ever had in my life, and even she's just a friend. She's never had any interest in me. I'm pretty sure she's only my friend because she feels sorry for me. I'm sorry if I'm hurting anyone at all for doing this, but I just can't live like this anymore." The screen froze for a few seconds. Then the show continued with SpongeBob writing his final sentence. The contrast stayed dark instead of flickering from light to dark, and the children stopped crying. It was absolute silence except for SpongeBob saying, "Goodbye." The cries came back. SpongeBob quickly stood up, twisted off the lid on the Prozac bottle, dipped his head back, let all of the pills in the bottle fill into his mouth, and swallowed them all whole. The screen twitched and the animation was darker but still visible. SpongeBob clutched his stomach and vomited realistic, pale greenish orange stomach bile. It was clear that his body was trying to cleanse itself from the overdose, but it was no use. SpongeBob collapsed onto the floor and lied there motionless until the screen turned to static. Then Patrick came in with a creepy smile on his face and he took all his food while Squidward took his money and Sandy kissed Mr. Krabs. Mr. Krabs proposed to Sally. She said no. That caused Mr. Krabs to spiral down into depression. He commits suicide. Gary takes over Krusty Krabs. Meow. Needless to say, I was scared out of my mind, and sleep was out of the question. Recently, I've been looking for this episode all over the internet, but not even one website seems to have it. If you recognize this episode, please let me know. Alternative ending. SpongeBob SquarePants uses medicine, but he didn't. The flickering was replaced with a rainbow, and the kids were now saying why. He didn't do it and laughed, and SpongeBob SquarePants said in a muffled voice since he didn't have a mouth, April Fools. I just want to start off by saying if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and 2 other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles, such as How Weird Stuff Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye, by Valve when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as is normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubbles splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things began to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with animation. So, yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is at this point there is no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in this silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more, all the while a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow I mean it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself, for a split second then back to normal. The wind through the tree sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is this sound, and Squidward sobbing, sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good a sound as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched this show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The LED animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his upturned face, hopped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were of course mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were that of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were, but he knew he had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her above another crude cut along her back. Again the body was on the street and the photographer's shadow was visible. Very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit and one in turn, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when this scene started. He put his tentacles down and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism like the others were in the beginning of this episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all is his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep-voiced laughing, and this time the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand, the right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker and I lost it. I vomited on the floor, the animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out and that deep voice said "do it" and we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him, and his bed, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and cause me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone and the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened and to this day nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified and no clues were gathered from the data involved nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. I'm a retro gamer. I love to play both recent and old games, but especially games created by Sega. Revenge of the Shinobi, Streets of Rage, Sonic, Golden Axe. But a month ago, something happened. Something made me look at these wonderful games in another perspective. It was in a foggy night, 3 AM to be more specific. I was playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on the emulator. Since I wasn't sleepy, I chose both Sonic and Tails as my character and started playing. After reaching Chemical Plant Zone, I got bored so I decided to play a little with the characters. I went to a part of the zone where I could find many enemies such as Grabber, a spider that grabs the character and then self-destructs, and Spiny who shoots balls of acid. I used Tails to have a little fun, since he's invincible and imitates every move Sonic makes. I took a few steps so the enemy could see me, and when it attacked, I ran leaving Tails behind. I did that several times until something weird happened. All of a sudden, Tails' animation changed to the one he makes when he drowns. and the sound was different too. It was the sound your character makes when it touches spikes without having any rings left. The sound was very loud too, even more than the usual. I thought it was a bug, since the game was played on an emulator. I waited for Tails to appear again, but he never showed up. I decided to reset the game. Everything was normal, except for the part where the logo is supposed to appear, showing Tails and Sonic smiling. When I looked at it, Tails was missing. He just wasn't there at all. And instead of smiling, Sonic had a weird reaction, like he was disappointed or depressed. I was getting a little scared, since it was too weird to be a simple emulator bug, but I tried to dodge it and began playing again. I went to the options to choose both Sonic and Tails like I did the last time, but the only options there were only Sonic. The other options were missing. I didn't know what to think. I began playing, and when I looked at Sonic's sprite on the Emerald Hill Zone, he had the wrong expression. He looked uncomfortable, like when you don't touch the controller for some time. I controlled Sonic, but even running, his expression didn't change. I was seriously creeped out, so I closed the emulator and turned on my Sega Genesis so I could play correctly without all those. I didn't even know what to call, but I'm sure those weren't just bugs. When the game started, Sega's logo was different. It was red and the sound was louder, like the one I heard when Tails disappeared. I tried to believe it was just glitch, because the console was already very old, but I was starting to get my doubts. Despite of that weird glitch, everything was back to normal. Tails was there again, the sprites were okay, the sounds too. I sighed in relief and started playing. When I reached the boss, I didn't have any rings, and accidentally, Tails touched Robotnik's car and made the same animation he made on Chemical Plant Zone, and the game froze. I started freaking out and reset it. The screen was now white. No Sega logo, no sprites, no sounds, no nothing. I quit. I was very creeped out by now, and when I went to turn off the console, a text box appeared. I couldn't believe it. I have never seen such thing in this game. I was more surprised by the text. You killed him. I tried to press all the buttons on the controller, but nothing worked. I also tried to turn off the console, but I couldn't. I even tried to turn off the television, but I was very scared by now. I sat on the sofa and grabbed the controller. Again, another text box appeared. You destroyed his life. Are you going to try to destroy mine too? Are you having fun? Are you? I pressed the button A again, and I was now on the Chemical Plant Zone. The background was different, though. The background was more darker than usual, and I could see different shades of red. Was it blood? The music was different too. It was the boss's music, but reversed and slow. Only Sonic was there. The gameplay was normal besides one little thing. When I defeated an enemy, instead of a sprite of a bunny or a chicken, I would see the same animal but torn apart and in a puddle of blood. The blood was so realistic. I didn't even reach the second stage. In the end of the first stage, I couldn't control Sonic anymore. He began running for 2 minutes. When he stopped, another text box appeared. Are you ready? Ready to see what you've done to him? I was speechless. I asked myself what I could have done to let this happen. But then I realized, did I kill Tails? I couldn't believe it. It was just a game. It was just a bunch of codes. I couldn't do such thing. Then, another text box appeared, but this one was different. There was just a yes/no option. I didn't hesitate and chose number. I knew it. I couldn't even choose that option. I had to choose yes. The game wanted me to choose yes. I did that. It was a horrible mistake. The screen faded to black, but 5 seconds after, I saw a close-up of Tails' corpse. It was full of wounds. His guts were thrown out and he was missing an eye. That image was so realistic, I almost vomited. Then, another text box appeared. I hope you're happy. You killed me. Were you having fun with it? I know you were. Do you want to do it again? Play with me again. I'm just a simple toy for you. A simple toy. For all of you. I was horrified. I felt something different inside me. Was it guilt? It couldn't be. I'm sure more players already did this with Tails, but was he really in pain? I never touched a retro game again. I spend my days playing in my PS3, and every time my character dies, I remember what happened. I will never forget. William Afton woke up, which, to him, was extremely unlikely, considering the fact that mere moments before, he had been trying to force his way out of a ventilation shaft, trapped inside a malfunctioning spring-locked suit, while all around him, behind him, in front of him was fire, threatening to burn everything down. Was he really dead this time? Or is this gonna be one of those times where he thought he was dead and just ends up as a zombie robot hybrid things? Afton has had a strange, terrible life. Pushing these thoughts out of his mind, He looked around, trying to make sense of where he was. Up to this point, he thought he had been closing his eyes, but only then did he realize his eyes were open all along. And yes, the room, or place, or building, was that dark. Afton tried to feel his way around, but was unable to grasp onto anything. He felt a peculiar sensation. He found that there was no floor. He was floating. Now, William was extremely confused. He absent-mindedly scratched his head. Wait, Afton realized he had hands and legs. Unscathed, unburnt legs. Real, flesh instead of metal and fabric limbs. Actual limbs. He couldn't see them. The room he was in was lightless, but he could feel them. He also had hair, a face, a torso, covered in skin instead of being pure bones and muscles and viscera. He also realized he was wearing what seemed to be a work uniform, with a metal badge clipped on. He remembered, vividly, that it was the same thing he was wearing before he got into that cursed spring bodysuit for the last time. Okay, so he was dead. That was the only explanation. But he was breathing. He still was. He still existed. Had he ended up in purgatory? Was he to spend eternity here? Well, that's not too bad, he thought, and remembered all the things he did. He chuckled slightly, being able to find humor in memories that would give even the vilest psychopaths chills. His chuckles soon turned into giggles, then full-blown laughter. Booming laughter, echoing thousands of time in the vast nothingness of the void. He remembered how foolish Henry had been, with his talks of hell and punishments. He remembered what Henry had said that day he tried to immolate his own work partner. Every single word. The darkest pits of hell has opened up to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend. But there was no hell for him. He had escaped from karma even in death. No pain, no fire, no brimstone. Henry had killed himself for nothing. This greatly amused William Afton, and he kept laughing. Now he was wheezing, and clutching his stomach, and gasping for breath, even. But he laughed on, and on and on and on. He laughed for what seemed to be days, but could possibly be seconds, when something made him stop. A burst of light, a miniature supernova, an explosion, which lit the void up, revealing the violet shade of his uniform. It ended with a fizz. Blue and yellow smoke came out from every direction, and from the center, something small and heavy dropped into his hand. It was a small box. By now, the small explosion had ended, leaving everything pitch black again, but he could feel small engravings and patterns on the box, which he presumed to be made out of some kind of metal. He felt his way around the box, and on its front side, he found what seemed to be words engraved in the center. 2 words. William's judgment. Utterly bewildered at this point, Afton felt his way to the opening of the box. He found what appeared to be a handle protruding from the top, and pulled on it. Light filled the void. His eyes, after spending so long in the dark, was watering from the pain. Soon, his eyes stopped hurting, but the light did not fade. Afton continued to squint, when he heard something. A deep, booming voice, coming from every direction, was talking to him. It was crisp, and there seemed to be a slight tone of humor in its voice. "Hello, Mr. William Afton." Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the light faded. Afton found himself surrounded by clouds. Above was blue sky, but below him was also blue sky. He looked up and found that in front of him was a man wearing a pristine white suit and tie, and a pair of glasses, who seemed to be walking on the clouds themselves. He was elderly, and he had striking blue eyes, the same shade as the sky, and hair as wispy as the clouds. Strangely enough, he was also looking at an iPad, as if reading something. God asked William, "Okay, so, about that eternal punishment thing, but God merely sushed him." "Yes, I've read your file. Serial child murderer, designer of various robots specializing in the capture and murder of children's, one of whose victim is your own daughter. Many attempted murders even after you died the first time," God said, his voice devoid of any hate, just pure judgment. "I think we both know where this is going, don't we, Mr. Afton?" God concluded, with a slight grin. Afton stammered, "Well, yes, I'm going to hell, right? Well, naturally, you committed several first-degree murders. So yeah, sorry, Afton, but if it's any comfort, it's been specially designed to suit you." God replied, "I also think that you would be delighted to know that no punishment is eternal, Mr. Afton. Of course, yours would be very long, probably a few centuries, if not a few millennia, but trust me, that's nothing compared to how long Mr. Hitler is going to be here for. I'm going to be in hell for centuries, William shouted, or more. But if you want to get it over quick, then you'd better start your punishment the earlier the better, I suppose. Any questions? Mr. Afton God asked, with an air of finality. What is my hell like? Asked William. This time, God laughed. That's a surprise, Mr. Afton. Now, off you go. Afton felt everything went black again. This time, something appeared before him. 3 words. Ultimate custom night. But before he could do anything, the words disappeared again. He heard the voice of God booming from the darkness again. Sorry, my bad. That was your son's personal hell. He's gonna be here for a few years, but anyway, here's your personal hell. The right one this time. A different set of words appeared before him. And then an image. An image that strikes fear into the hearts of even the likes of William Afton. Afton shrieked. No. Thomas and Friends has been one of the longest running kids shows, starting in 1984. Originally, it used models, but transitioned into CGI between 2008 and 2009. It's really come a long way, and I was glad to be one of the people working on it. I worked for Hit Entertainment as one of the show's writers. I still work for Hit, but I no longer work on the actual show. Since Mattel has recently bought Hit, they are completely changing the show into something called Thomas and Friends. Big world, big adventures, which I am pretty sure is going to be a total failure. The main reason I stopped working on the show was because my 2 favorite characters, Edward and Henry, got the boot, only to be replaced by 2 new female characters, which I hated. Mattel thought it was better this way, because the STEAM team was unbalanced in terms of gender, only 1 female engine, 7 male. However, I thought this was a horrible idea, because Thomas and Friends already had an almost equal audience of male and female viewers, thus rendering the addition of these characters completely pointless, besides benefiting to the plot, which is Thomas going on an adventure around the world with one of the female characters. Instead of working on the show, I created individual shorts with a group of close co-workers, which are most often focused on Edward and Henry rather than Thomas. They weren't aired on TV, but were uploaded to YouTube for a short time. Anyway, enough with that. It's time to get to the point of this story. It was the 5th of March, 2015. The adventure begins. My favorite Thomas and Friends special had just been released 2 days prior, and I was proud of myself for helping with it. That day, I was ordered to look for a certain file related to an unfinished script for an upcoming episode. While browsing through a bunch of documents about the show within a folder that contained various deleted scenes, unfinished animations, various transcripts, and prototypes, I discovered a file called Thomas and the Unfinished Bridge, restricted. I double-clicked on it, but got a message saying that a password was needed to access this file, which I didn't know. This got me confused. I kept track of all of the Thomas and Friends episodes, both old and new, and I knew that there wasn't one called Thomas and the Unfinished Bridge. I asked my boss about this document. Oh, that, he asked, seeming slightly concerned. In 1986, an episode was going to be made called Thomas and the Unfinished Bridge, but it was never aired. Why, I asked. Well, it was supposed to be a regular episode, my boss explained. The episode was produced as the finale for the 2nd season. From what I was told, the episode was supposed to happen like this. Thomas was taking a group of VIPs on a tour of Sodor, when his brakes began to fail. He was speeding towards an unfinished bridge, until Edward saw him and managed to stop Thomas by coupling up to the coach and applying his brakes, sort of like the episode Old Iron. Somebody working at the company made a draft of the episode and sent it to the show's main creators in a VHS tape. I think the guy's name was Eric. However, the company noticed some graphic things in the draft. They fired the person who made it and cancelled the entire episode. But why, I wondered. I don't know, and I don't want to either. I've never seen this episode myself, nor do I plan to, and I don't know what the password is to that file you showed me, my boss answered. And what happened to the VHS tape, I asked. I've been told that the company kept it for a time, but it was stolen by somebody, possibly by Eric himself. Nobody knows where it went, he said. This was sort of creepy. I should have ignored this Thomas and the Unfinished Bridge thing, but my curiosity often overpowered me in my life, and this was one of those occasions. When I got home that same day, I searched eBay for anything called Thomas and the Unfinished Bridge. Surprisingly enough, I actually found an old VHS tape with that name being sold by an account which had a username of a bunch of random characters, letters and numbers specifically. I found this odd and thought maybe I should stop there, but my curiosity got the better of me again. I ordered the VHS tape. It took 8 days for the tape to arrive before it finally did on the 13th of March, Friday the 13th. What an odd coincidence. I connected an old VCR I had in a closet to my TV and inserted the tape into the player. What was on the tape began to play. What I saw was way too scary, dark, and depressing for a children's show. There was no title screen. Instead, the episode just started. This was understandable, because apparently the tape was just a draft. It started off normally enough, with a shot of Thomas chugging through a forest happily, carrying a coach full of passengers behind him. There were two things that were slightly odd, though. First off, there was no narration, even though there is narration in practically every other episode of the show. And second, instead of pulling Annie and Clarabelle like he usually does while transporting passengers, Thomas was pulling a coach that resembled the red coach Spencer would pull from season 7 and onwards. The episode then showed Thomas approaching a station, presumably the one where he would drop off the special passengers. He tried to apply his brakes, and they failed. That's exactly what my boss said was supposed to happen. Thomas went straight through the station, unable to stop, as the people on the station gave confused looks. The classic runaway theme used in the show during situations similar to these started playing. Next, there was a shot of the front of Thomas. There was a scared expression on his face. Then, a shot from behind Thomas appeared. It showed him passing a danger sign, the same one used in the episodes Down the Mine and Percy Takes the Plunge. This episode was already slightly intense for children, but it didn't seem too bad yet. Then, there was a shot of the passengers inside the coach. They were all screaming in terror, and their screams seemed realistic as well, as if it was an actual recording of people screaming within a large room. Later, a wide shot showed Thomas passing a siding where Edward was resting. Edward noticed what was happening and sped onto the track, going towards Thomas. Soon, he got to the coach. However, there was no one there to couple Edward up to it. This was a serious problem. There was another shot of the inside of the coach, with more realistic screams. Then, there was an extremely wide shot showing Thomas getting dangerously close to the unfinished bridge. Unfinished bridge PNG. Then, there was a shot of the inside of Thomas' cabin. His driver said, "The brakes are working again by far." That was the only speaking line in the entire episode besides the screams. What was more odd was that the voice didn't sound like it came from Ringo Starr or George Carlin. Then, it showed Thomas. He was probably supposed to apply his brakes, but he didn't. Instead, he smiled and sped up even faster. Now things were getting seriously messed up. The runaway theme began to lower in pitch, becoming distorted and demonic almost, with screams playing in the background. Thomas began to laugh. Then, as I watched with horror, he plunged straight over the side of the bridge with the coach. I saw Edward brake behind him, barely avoiding the end of the bridge. Thomas' driver and fireman were shown to have jumped clear before he went overboard. Thomas and the coach landed on a bunch of rocks, getting battered, before falling into a stream. There was one more shot of the inside of the coach, now half submerged in water. Dead bodies were floating from within the coach. The screen faded to static for about 10 seconds before a new scene was shown. Edward was watching in terror as Sir Topham Hatt used a blowtorch to take off a wrecked Thomas' face, which showed an expression of pure pain and horror. Tears were running down his cheeks. Then, Sir Topham Hatt took off his face, which immediately became lifeless. "You deserve this, and much more," Sir Topham Hatt said angrily. 10 more seconds of static before another scene appeared. Edward was in the smelter's shed pushing a flatbed, which Thomas' remains were on. "It's a shame it had to end this way," Edward murmured. I watched as the claw came down and grabbed him. It pulled him upward and dropped Thomas' mangled remains into the huge pool of molten metal. He melted in the pool, on screen. His face melted last, which was horrifying enough, but even worse was that just before his face melted, it could be seen that he had an expression of happiness. Then, the episode faded to static for good. I took the VHS tape out of the VCR and stored it in the attic of my home. Nobody would ever see this horrific excuse for an episode again. Later, I noticed that the username of the Amazon account which sold me the tape wasn't just random letters and numbers. It was something encoded in base 64, an encoding scheme that converted words into random random letters, numbers, and sometimes other character. After running the username through a base64 decoder, it came out as a URL for a website. When I visited the website, it was just a couple of sentences written on a blank page, but those sentences scared me. Children need to know what really happens in the world. I'll make sure it's not hidden from them. Eric.